Great for us to have been able to establish a connection once again with Ken Gichinga, who joins us from Nairobi as we look at President William Ruto's plan to tax the wealthiest Kenyans. So, Ken, very quickly, as I said earlier, this is not the first time a wealth tax has been suggested. There was one that was planned for 2018, but it very quickly got cancelled. So that's a conversation that's been happening in Kenya. So why did it get kicked out in 2018?
You're absolutely spot on, Tolulope. The wealth tax has had a checkered history in Kenya. First proposed in 2018, was kicked out of the House, largely due to lack of public participation. That tends to be the code that is frequently used for policies, perhaps that have not been thoroughly thought through. It's making a comeback right now, and I think it will need to have a more nuanced approach this time round.
So there are several arguments on either side of this tax the wealthy debate. And part of the conversation typically is that opponents say that a wealth tax could discourage or penalize the most successful entrepreneurs and not just people with old money. But those in support say higher taxes on the rich will help to finance spending or even to finance transfers of money to lower income people, which is good for society's welfare. And most economists typically value money received by a poor person more highly than money that goes to a rich person. So what is the aim of President William Ruto with his proposed wealth tax?
Well, I think his objective is to show up the budget. About 60% really of our tax revenue is going towards servicing debt. And that has been growing over the last few years. The problem with the word wealth is there are two types of wealth. There's wealth, as you've said, that comes through industry, that comes through innovation, and you want to encourage that. You don't want to discourage it. And there's also the second type of wealth, for example, where you own a piece of land and it just appreciates because a road has been developed outside of it. So I think those are two different types. I think wealth that comes through enterprise and innovation should not be overtaxed, but wealth really that comes through land appreciation or really sort of like the environment where the land is improving, I think that needs to be subjected to tax.
Okay, so you've listed out a few ways to tax wealth, and we know there are many different ways to introduce a wealth tax. So particularly for President Ruto's plans, what do we know in terms of the details? How does he plan to go about this? What could the legislation include?
Well, it's still very early days. We haven't got the exact details. All he said is the hierarchy of priorities will be to tax the wealthy, then to tax consumption, then to tax incomes and trade. I think this is the point where we need to start making the difference between what we call progressive taxes and regressive taxes. When you have taxes such as VAT, excise tax, those tend to hurt the people at the bottom disproportionately, and that's why they're called regressive taxes. I think we need to now move towards progressive taxes where those who have more are able to contribute more to national development. I think that needs to be the philosophical underpinning of any good tax policy, that it's more progressive and less regressive. In terms of the Ruto administration, it's still early days. I think that speech that you played out is all we have right now, but we expect more details to be coming out soon.
So as you talk about whether there are retrogressive and progressive taxes, we know Kenya has already raised several taxes in order to bolster its revenue. It recently increased the capital gains tax from 5% to 15% in the Finance Act, and that is expected to take effect from January of 2023. And some believe that taxing the rich could actually slow economic growth and also be a dent on capitalism. When you look at, I guess at this point, all we have to go on is the president's body language. What effect do you think a tax he proposes could have on Kenya's economy, especially if rich Kenyans are really driving economic growth and employment and things like that?
Well, if it's just a broad tax on overall wealth, I think it could have negative effects because people could easily move their businesses to other countries, businesses abroad. In fact, you'll notice a lot of emerging technology companies in Africa are already headquartered in Delaware in the United States because of that. So I think we need to move away from just the broad blanket of wealth, which is not useful, and it's also very hard to administer. I think we need to be more specific, talk about if it's land appreciation. I think it needs to have that kind of specificity. I think if we can just focus on land appreciation, then that makes more sense, because indeed it's because of the public works that land appreciates in value. So it's only fair that part of that land appreciation goes back to the public coffers. I think if we have those specifics, then definitely I think we can make more progress.
So I like the fact you mentioned administration, because looking into this, what we see around the world, particularly for wealthy people, is that every time there's an increase in taxes, there seems to be a corresponding increase in tax evasion, of which the wealthy seem to be the worst people doing that. And such taxes, as you said, can also be difficult to administer. So if the president proposes a wealth tax, there also has to be the preparation to address the possible evasion and administration of such a tax. How is that working out?
Yeah, that becomes incredibly difficult, because if you underline what wealth means, it means several things to different people. It could mean property, it could mean vehicles, it could even mean paintings and such. So it becomes very difficult to be able to establish the net worth of somebody who has a large collection of ancient paintings. So it becomes very difficult, very messy. But when you limit yourself to specifics, sort of you say these are the assets we are looking at for, this is it, this is the land appreciation that we are looking at, then it becomes easier, because now it becomes limited to, for example, land appreciation. And because land is an immovable asset, it's difficult to shift it abroad.
So, Ken, I have to ask this. So, taxing Kenya's wealthy is not the only thing that President Ruto has promised. He also said he would reform the country's tax system to deal with inequality. And he says that his new tax system should be fair, efficient, and the tax burden must reflect the ability to pay of every taxpayer. And those are the words he used. So, to really make a change beyond just taxing the wealthy, what do you think are the top 3 reforms that his administration should take on when it comes to the tax system in Kenya?
I think the number one reform is making the distinction between what is a progressive tax and what is a regressive tax. I think that distinction needs to be made. Number 2, as you've said, the principles of taxation are around proportionality, ease of administration. So all the tax policies that are put into place have to meet these conditions that Adam Smith really laid out many centuries ago, that it has to be proportionate, it has to be easy to administer, it has to be fair. And I think once that is put into place, the place of things like excise tax, which really make the cost of living high for many ordinary Kenyans, they push Kenyans to buy cheaper goods, those ones will start being reduced and almost being eliminated.
So, Ken, my final question is this. This is part of the president's plan to raise revenue, and we see that Kenya is standing on what looks like the brink of debt distress. But borrowing has gone up year on year, as I said earlier, going up 6-fold since 2013. And so far, most of the plans he's unveiled seem to be focused on increasing revenue, but not necessarily reducing expenditure. We've had the IMF and the World Bank also flag the cost of governance, or the cost of things that Kenya is spending money on, recurrent expenditure, wages. That's been a part of the conversation. What do you think about that when you look at the president's plan in terms of increasing revenue, but not maybe possibly plugging the loopholes and the gaps that are causing also the increase in expenditure?
Well, in the same speech that you alluded to in the terms of Parliament opening that speech, we also see that the president talked about reducing the budget by 300 billion. He's directed Treasury to find 300 billion worth of savings to be able to plug the sort of like that deficit. So we do think that there'll be initiatives on both sides. Number one, increasing efficiency, increasing revenue collection, but also number 2, that 300 billion, which in my opinion is a very, very big budget cut, which might have some effects down the road.
All right, so we'll be watching to see this play out. As you said, with the last one, it was about public participation and feedback. We're going to definitely hear from Kenya's richest and wealthiest as to how they feel about this and, of course, what it means for the tax system overall. Ken Gichinga, thank you so much for joining me.